Welcome back to the 252nd episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including how the Senate can actually limit the FISA surveillance expansion actually, we'll get into it. They are actually trying to expand it rather than shrink it and just get that 702 part of it passed. And then there's also an interesting article talking about how the Biden Department of Education is going after GCU, the largest Christian university in the nation, and a little bit of back and forth between Dan Crenshaw and Tucker Carlson, and how it actually highlights the two sides of the party that are growing currently. And of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So if you were to go back to 2002, 2003, and we're starting to pass this new National Security Act, we're trying to crack down on the possibility of terrorists coming in and attacking our nation, would you allow the mass surveillance systems, algorithms, the different FISA allowances, all these different mechanisms that allow the government and these three-letter agencies, as well as the four-letter agencies, we don't want to leave out the four-letter agencies, to surveil not only people around the world, but also anyone that's in direct communication with them, anybody that could be suspected of being a domestic threat? Would you allow all of this to go through? And I'm sure there are plenty of great arguments from people who would say that, hey, this has actually stopped a lot of terrible things from happening. It's allowed us to cut off some of the heads of the serpent before they're even able to bite us. But with some of the repercussions, with what we saw come out from Snowden, which was a really formative part of my life, I don't know, if you're about my age, that probably at least made you more jaded along with 2008 about what the government can and should do. But is that something that you would allow forward, seeing all the repercussions of it? And obviously we're trying to prove a counterfactual because we don't know what would happen without it in place. But do you think it would have been so much worse that some of these violations of our freedom are actually worth it? It's not a catch-22. It's not a BS answer. Tell me your opinion. I'd love to hear everything everybody has to say. Throw it down in the comment section. I'm open to hearing multiple opinions on this one. So, to jump to the first article that is about this topic, about the expansion or at least the renewal of some of these FISA courts and warrantless searches, essentially. You saw this go through the House. They were going to not let it through. They weren't going to re-up this section of the FISA, Section 702. They weren't going to let the surveillance authority come back up, and then they actually slipped it through, and now it's on to the Senate. The article comes from RealClearPolitics, and the headline reads, Senate can stop expansion of government surveillance. And, well, of course they could, but are they going to? I'm not cynical today. Actually, I'm kind of vibing. I came back from the gym. I was like, oh yeah. Oh, excuse me. I'm gonna actually bleep that in post. I'm gonna try to bleep that in post. Never done that before. But the point is, I was ready to take on the day. I was like, yes, we're gonna kill this podcast. No biggie. And I'm kind of putting my cynic hat on because this is one of those articles where you read through it and they seem to be making an argument that they should lower the amount of surveillance, but they also make the counter argument that that's not what they're doing whatsoever. So let's read the little background section so you have a little bit more of an idea of what Section 702 is all about if you don't know. And if you do know, bear with me. We'll get to some of the more relevant facts about the process and what the Senate could do here in a minute. Quote, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is a legal authority enacted by Congress to enable the surveillance of foreign threats located abroad, but it has increasingly been a means of surveilling Americans located within the United States whose communications are often caught up in the government's global trawl of data. Section 702 authority has been used millions of times in recent years to query or target American communications. In the House, reformers proposed an amendment to add a warrant requirement before the government can query a U.S. person's data. That amendment, which failed in a tie vote, was the primary focus of debate on the bill. So, this is something that we were like, okay, yes, the American people, for the most part, we agree. People in the House, work with us here, okay? We put you in office to get our agenda items, our important issues solved. to figure some of these things out, to make sure that you are protecting our liberty, our freedom. And this is one of those major ones where it's like, this is my data. At the end of the day, I don't want my communications being looked on by any government, but especially my own. Because guess what? If you make an argument about your data being looked at by China, a lot of people will say, oh, what is China going to do? Give it to some of their companies and they're going to target ads at me, maybe make a profile about me. That doesn't, maybe if they invade America, it's a bad thing because they'll see some of my predilections towards not liking communism. But if your own government has a profile about you, guess who has the ability to exert more force upon you? Not some other nation, but the government that lives, that breathes based on your allowance. Basically, hey, I give you permission to exist, basically. I give you a little bit of my loyalty. I give up a few little bits of my freedom to be a part of this society, to be a part of this government, and therefore I recognize I'm actually giving you a little bit of force, a little bit of monopoly power of violence over me. And if you also have a profile in that government, they are the most likely and most able to actually exert force and affect your life, versus if it's another country, maybe you won't be able to go to that country. Great, but that's not going to affect your everyday life. It's not going to affect how you go and live in society. And yes, of course, I understand this is far-flung dystopian stuff to say, well, maybe there's a social credit score, but we've seen things like this in China. We have seen things like this in other nations, especially ones being aided by China, where they're giving them the infrastructure and technology that is needed in order to actually track faces, just like they have done in their own authoritarian regime. So it's not outside the realm of possibility. And yes, we all love our freedoms here. We want to believe that that won't happen here. But why even let any government that is supposed to be protecting us have that data in the first place if there's even the remotest possibility that they will use it against you? And honestly, it's a little bit of paranoia, but it's just making sure that you have the ability to exist in your own bubble, that you can not have any part of your life scrutinized as long as you are living within the laws of the land. And if they're trying to make laws of the land that affect the digital world, it gets really tricky because then you're starting to come into private people's homes. And that's actually one of the things that this article talks about, how they're actually trying to expand this surveillance into anything that is deemed or could be used for communication, like Wi-Fi router companies, these small businesses that facilitate different types of communication. So it could actually breach into these small businesses that are using like a Verizon router or a Comcast router or anything, or an Xfinity router, depending on where you live. There's a whole bunch of different router services. But because they are means of facilitating this communication, it's possible that they could be, not saying that they have to give over their information immediately to the U.S. government or any agency, but they could be caught up in an investigation and have to give over troves of data about, so say a criminal, an international terrorist goes into one of the local McDonald's and they join the Wi-Fi network and they do some sort of WhatsApp communication on there. Then in theory, the government could go to that McDonald's and say, hey, we don't need a warrant. We know that we have this power under this expansion of the FISA Act, and at the end of the day, we need you to turn over your information. Hey, I don't need any if and or buts about it. Well, we can't look at the exact IP of whoever's there. I don't care. Turn over all your information for that day specifically, and we'll worry about all the excess data that we get. We're going to look for our guy. And then your data as an American citizen without a warrant could be turned over. Now, of course, it's not finished yet. The amendment is not 100% locked in the Senate, and that doesn't mean that it's going to be used exactly the way that I described, but that could be a possible interpretation of how the amendment is structured. So do you want this to be the case? I want you to seriously think about it. Seriously, take a second. Are they using these different routing companies, these different communication facilitators in order to get more information in public spaces? What's the next step? Are they going to do it so that anything facilitated that helps facilitate communication could be something that they can look into, because they argue, hey, we can't look into your house router, essentially. That is something where they put an addendum in the bill. I do want to read you the section from this article because it describes it better than I could ever do. Quote, if this became law, millions of American small business owners would have a legal obligation to hand over data that runs through their equipment. These small businesses could be forced to give the NSA direct access to their equipment, or else might just copy message in mass and turn them over. And when they're done with doing their part in mass surveillance, these small businesses would then be placed under a gag order to hide their activities from the customers. Small businesses are just waking up to what is about to be done to them by the Everyone's a Spy Amendment. Customers are sure to be, and yes, be clear, if we're to put anything in that quote, Everyone's a Spy Amendment, that's the actual name of the amendment. It's not just a fancy name from RealClearPolitics, which is absolutely hilarious and a little obvious what the government's trying to do here, but we can move on from that. Customers are sure to be outraged when they learn that the businesses they patronize are potentially spying on them. All U.S. business might suffer, as this law is sure to also widen the wedge between the United States and the European Union on the contentious issue of spying and data privacy. Meanwhile, U.S. consumers and businesses would have no legal way to resist these intrusions. It is easy to see why Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon calls this expansion of government surveillance terrifying. And my question is, if they already have a backdoor, and what I mean by that is not an actual systematic backdoor where they're talking to these companies like, oh yeah, give us a backdoor to your system. The geeky talk, let's be clear, I don't understand how you program a backdoor, but I think it's common parlance that we can say, hey, there's a backdoor into the system so people can get in from the outside. I'm not saying that there is a backdoor in some of this technology, in the programming that allows the NSA to come in. I'm saying this is a legal backdoor, because if the legal backdoor exists that, hey, we can access your technology if it's being deployed in a small business, well, guess what? What stops them from in the future? They already have the precedent. Well, yeah, we've already actually gone through this small businesses, this large businesses technology. We've actually done different surveillance through their routers, their communication technology. So we've already done things like this before on a business side. Why couldn't we expand it into people that we believe to be threats, domestic terrorists? Why can't we expand that into just their home? We won't get into all their neighbors' houses, but we'll at least look through their information, because obviously this person is a domestic terrorist, or they're just a terrorist living on U.S. soil, and we believe that they could be a threat. Now, of course, the common argument will be, hey, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, Alex, why does it matter? At the end of the day, Alex, you are a person who is doing everything legally. You are sitting there not trying to do anything suspicious. It's good, man. Don't worry about it. They'll violate your freedom, but you're not going to be hurt. You're not going to be hurt by it. So, as I've mentioned this argument before, there's an argument that I'll make that relies on that kind of lies on more philosophical means and also a few leaps. And it's the argument that, hey, maybe it's not illegal today, but if this power is established within government and it doesn't get repealed, because guess what? FISA, this amendment specifically has been up multiple times over the course of this bill's life, and even though people don't like it, it has not been struck down, so when we put something into law, it's very hard to repeal it. So with that understood, this precedent, this power that the government might gain, is not going away anytime soon, and guess what? What happens when laws change? What happens when this power that has been on the books gets used for something obscure, or a new law that is put into place that says, oh no, it's illegal for you to look at porn? In certain jurisdictions across the nation, there could be a porn ban, and they're saying, hey, no, you can't look at any type of porn. That is actually illegal now. And if you've done it within the last 12 months, then we're going to take issue with you, so on and so forth. There are lots of different examples where if they really wanted to crack down on something, if somebody that you didn't trust got into government, and I'm not saying I don't trust anybody in government right now, even though I don't trust a lot of people, the whole point is you want to mitigate the power that the government has in case it falls into the hands of somebody that you would not want to be there, who might execute some of those laws, use those powers that you willingly gave up because you trusted the government in the first place against you. That is the philosophical argument. That is the one that's a little bit paranoid, but I think it still holds true, which is just like you never want to give power over a bully who you say, hey, bully, at the end of the day, I don't really like you, man, but I'm going to give you this ticket that allows you to do anything you want to me for 5 minutes. That's not going to go well. Now, you would probably give that to your friend. You would give that ticket to your friend because you're saying, hey, I trust you. I know you. You're not too evil. You're not going to do anything too mean to me. But guess what? In government, your friend doesn't stay your friend, and it doesn't always stay a bully either. It goes back and forth. People with different values get in there. They gain control, and giving that ticket to the government, and then guess what? About a year, 2 years later, the bully gets into government because they're elected by the constituents, or at least maybe not the bully, just someone you don't agree with who has a different idea of what may be painful, or they may say, oh no, yeah, forcing you to do this isn't bad. I have to do it all the time, but in your world, it's the end of the world. Why would you give up that power over yourself? Just think about it that way. I think that analogy works pretty well. It's probably not the most simple. I'll refine it. I'll work on it. But I really do like the idea that I was trying to, or I like the way that I was trying to present that idea, and I hope it resonated with you. So, with the Everyone's a Spy amendment, and let's be clear, I'm not telling you to lobby, but if you don't like it, there are ways to reach out to people in Congress, in the Senate. You can get their phone numbers offline, and you can call them, you can give them a little ring, or you can go out on social media, you can go out on your own podcast and just yell and scream and shout about it, because I think it is some baloney. And let's hope the Senate says, that's a little bit too far. Even if we may agree with it, because we are the government, and we want to make sure that we are protecting our people. We don't want to get blamed for anything. At the end of the day, our constituents aren't going to necessarily allow us to do that. They're not willing to give up those freedoms yet. Yeah, once the big attack happens, then some fears in the air, then maybe they will be. But that's, once again, my very, very cynical hat on. So let's jump to our next article that comes from Fox News. Biden's education secretary vows to shut down the largest Christian university in the U.S. And when I first read this, I was like, whoa, hey, what's going on here? And then I thought to myself, oh, okay, it's Grand Canyon University. That's there in Arizona. Everybody knows that they put out a lot of promotions to a lot of different people. Even I've gotten some of their advertising, even though I am out of college. But I want to get to a little bit more of the meat on this one, because my opinions are out there, but at the end of and when I say out there, I mean, I will put them out there. I will talk about them. But I think the substance of this one is a little bit more important than the philosophical discussion that we were having in the last one. So, quote, after Department of Education Secretary Miguel Cardona vowed to shut down Grand Canyon University, the largest Christian university in the U.S., GCU officials are pushing back, telling Fox News Digital the crackdown stems from deeply held bias. Cardona made comments during a House Appropriations Committee hearing about cracking down on GCU and other universities like it on April 10th. So they say, other universities like it. What does he actually mean by that? Does he mean Christian universities, or does he mean something else? So this is another quote from the hearing, and it comes from Congresswoman Rosa DeLario. Quote, GCU is GCU a predatory for-profit school? So that's what they're talking about when they say other schools like it. For-profit, not the predatory part. Yeah, maybe they're implying that in their statement, maybe not. But the for-profit part is the thing that they're saying, hey, we're going after schools that are like this, that have this particular business model. And my question to them is twofold. One, if you really have a problem with these types of schools, why are you giving them federal funding? And two, why not let the free market decide? So if you really, and that's, both of those things actually go together. So if you don't like the way that GCU is going about doing their business, and you say that their degree is worthless, because Cardona multiple times says that the paper that you get for the diploma basically ain't worth what you paid for it. So this is what you do. You take out all the federal funding. You say, okay, if you're going to a for-profit Christian school, you could probably even, with GCU specifically, you could probably even try to argue some sort of separation of church and state, even if the funding normally goes directly to the students and it may not go to the school itself when they're doing some of these scholarships. You could say, well, actually, that scholarship money, we know because of the nature of applying for a scholarship, is going to go directly to the school. So we can't actually have federal dollars going into a Christian university and endorsing a certain worldview, a certain religion. And maybe you could use some workaround like that. I don't necessarily think that it's going to be fair. I think that will get litigated even more, because if you're funding schools, people going to schools all across the nation, and you're only not funding the Christian ones, I'm guessing that some Christians would probably try to have a lawsuit out there that would say that's also discriminating against them based on their faith. But I understand those limitations, but if you really wanted to stretch it, and I'm saying this for Cardona, if you really wanted to make it work, say on some basis of separation of church and state, and let's be clear, the Supreme Court has ruled on this multiple times, that there is a clear distinction between what the government can do and how it can intervene in Christian schools, and then say, okay, we're going to leave it to you. No longer are the federal dollars going there, so now you can do as you please. And guess what? For a for-profit school that is not getting large subsidies from the government, or even small subsidies for the government, or even the state, they have to make sure that when somebody leaves their school, they are making enough money to actually pay back their student debt. If they're not, especially if they're not getting Pell Grants and other federal grants that can just easily be repaid. And maybe you do say or stipulate that, hey, GCU, we want you to actually have to back some of these loans, just like I've said with all the other colleges we need to do from the very beginning, so that they have a genuine stake in the process. So they have to put down maybe part of the down payment for that loan. I don't know how you can actually do it, but they have to have some sort of stake in there. And then the whole point of this university is to, one, get back their money from the loan that they just backed, but also to make sure that they can keep bringing in students. If their diplomas are useless, if their students are leaving without a proper education, without being able to go out there and make money, without going out there and being competent and confident, then guess what? They're not going to bring in more students. And since the for-profit school, they're going to make less money. The shareholders are not going to be happy. And any money they do make gets reinvested either into admissions, into the facilities, into the teachers. And there's no longer a superstructure that says, hey, we can actually lay some of this money away. And some of them can. I mean, GCU probably makes enough money in a year that they could lay some of it away for a stormy day fund for a few years of bad admissions, or they could be like Harvard University and have some sort of endowment that they create. But at the end of the day, they have to make sure that they are doing the best they can with that money, and that they are constantly either bringing in new students or lowering the costs that the students have to pay in order to bring more students in, or keep the costs that the students are paying the same while also cutting down on some of the costs for running the school. And that's one that I think the education department and liberals in general would probably say is going to be an issue. So if you're talking to a person who's a little bit more conservative, a little bit more capitalist oriented, they like capitalist systems, they're going to look at the process of making more money. The first thing they're going to think of is bringing in more customers, making a new product, things like this. When you say, the profit margins went up, they're going to say, oh, okay, they obviously sold a little bit more. They must have cut costs somewhere in order to get the same product out there. That's probably going to be one of their first assumptions. And when you bring it up to somebody who is on the left or a little bit less capitalist friendly, they're going to say, okay, hey, how did they underpay their workers here? How did they cut some of the benefits that they were supposed to give to their people? How did they cut costs in a drastic way, not just on the product side, but on the labor side and things like that? So you kind of have presuppositions about these sort of situations going in. And I'm going to say that GCU probably does a little bit of both. They probably do a lot. They probably shift a lot and cut from places that the people who are on the left would not be happy with, aka administration, bureaucrats, things like that. They cut salaries, they cut the amount of people in those departments, and then they also use that money to develop the campus a little bit more, to bring in new professors who are going to do a specialty degree that is on, small micro tech, especially because you have TSMC moving into Arizona. So they're probably going to have some sort of special engineering or chip manufacturing program there in the next few years. And that's where you spend that money, because you're trying to bring in the future generation of workers and tell them, hey, we got a relevant degree for you. So as a for-profit school, you may have to make sure your pitch is clean and that you also have a little bit of money laid away, which you have now since you cut some of the bureaucracy, and you're getting more students because you've reinvested in the product a little bit. Now you got a little bit of extra profit. You throw it in a layaway fund in case admissions go down, because you can't grow forever, and maybe make an endowment where there's a little bit of a recurring return on your money that you put in there. So I think that at the end of the day, and yes, I know, I said that I was going to go on the facts of the case, but this is a pretty short article, honestly. The only other thing I want to mention here is they had a $37.7 million fine for overly high cost or misrepresenting the cost of the graduate program. It's about 15 times higher, maybe about 10 times higher on average than the other fines that the Biden administration is handing out. So the school is arguing that this is actually discrimination. We'll see how that one pans out in court. But I want to know your guys' opinion on this. Are for-profit colleges the way to go about this? Are public colleges the only way? Because we need to make sure that they're not money-grubbing kind of institutions. I definitely can hear that argument. I have heard that argument, and I don't necessarily think it's the worst one in the world, but that doesn't mean that we need to stifle the free market institutions. And if they can do something better, if they can come out ahead, then maybe we have to strategically pivot. Or maybe we have both of them existing in their own worlds, because maybe the private colleges actually specialize in certain things, special degrees, and the state-sponsored ones still do humanities and things like that, or they focus on foreign policy and have more state-focused degrees. Maybe that's the way forward. We'll see. I don't think it will actually pan out that way, especially with some of these rulings against GCU, but you never know in the future. All right, so let's jump to our last article. It's going to be a very, very short one, because it's also a very short article that comes from HuffPost. The headline reads, GOP Rep. Dan Crenshaw burns Tucker Carlson with one stinging question about his job. So let's go through the two statements from the men. We'll go through the Carlson one and then the Crenshaw one. Carlson said, quote, "Why do the reddest states produce the dumbest, most liberal Republicans?" Carlson tweeted. "Why aren't John Chiron and Dan Crenshaw bagging groceries at Walmart?" And then Dan Crenshaw fired back, "Why aren't you bagging groceries in Moscow?" And this is in reference to Tucker's episode where he's going through a Moscow grocery store, and he's like, "Oh yeah, hey, they have a beautiful cart system. It seems very clean in here. Look at the low prices." People have talked about how inflation has affected them differently, and also the fact that you're transferring U.S. dollars into rubles and not actually going off of the base pay of the people in that country. It would actually make those prices seem a lot higher. But because he has an American salary and he's going to Moscow versus living in Moscow with a Russian salary, then, that food there appears a little bit cheaper than what we would be getting in the United States, even though in Russia it would be a larger portion of the people living there's salary than it would here in the United States. But these sort of little back and forth, little tit-tats, Carlson, he has become the uncle that people kind of love, but kind of says some crazy stuff on the right. And Crenshaw, he used to be an anti-establishmentarian, and now he's kind of fallen into the ranks. So honestly, I'm going to be frank, both of these guys, they have their crowds now, but I'll be honest, this kind of feels like the HuffPost commenting on the out kids on both sides of a very particular movement that they used to be popular in. And then they're like, "Oh, look, it demonstrates the entire right." It's like, no, the people that used to like Crenshaw don't love him so much anymore. The people that used to love Carlson, some still love him, but a lot of people not necessarily anymore. So it's not the best example of what's going on the right, but the HuffPost, they got to make sure that any sort of division between the right is highlighted in full force. And let's be clear, Fox News does the exact same thing when it comes to AOC and Sanders or AOC and Biden. They always point out these sort of issues like, oh, look at the division. That's the news agency. They can get a little bit of drama clicks. And guess what? They did get a drama click for me, but I wanted to highlight it because I think it's actually funny to show what HuffPost thinks is important, or at least what is worth commenting on. And also that both of those tweets got very, very little engagement. Carlson's got more than Crenshaw's, but both of them got low engagement compared to some of Tucker's other stuff that he has put out there. Then again, maybe it's changed since I last saw it. So let's jump to our final article. It's our Daily Delight. This one comes from Parade Pets. Horse snacking on fruit by the foot is too adorable to miss. And honestly, I agree. When I saw, and you're not supposed to, you're going to give a sugar cube to your horse, and that's fine. But when I saw the article saying a fruit by the foot, that feels like there's so much stuff that's fake in there that's going to get gummed up in their stomach. But the article says it's actually safe, and it was actually a reward for this horse whose name is Skip for having a good day at the pageant. It's actually a TikTok, and his lips flap a little bit as he's trying to get it in, and then his teeth start pulling on it. So if you want to see that cute video, or you want to see and read any of today's articles, there will be links in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcast, as well as Podvine, and the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So thank you for joining me for this episode. With all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe. Don't die.